Dobrý deň, vítajte pri sledovaní relácie Portrét. Dnes hostíme muža, ktorý má slovenské korene. Svoje PhD získal na prestížnej Cornellovej univerzite a práve tam siaha aj začiatok jeho spolupráce s kolegami Leem a Richardsonom na výskume hélia-3 pri teplote blížiacej sa absolútnej nule, čo je mimochodom mínus 273,15 stupňov Celzia. Spoločné úsilie im v roku 1996 prinieslo Nobelovú cenu za objav supertekutosti v extrémne ochladenom héliu. Pôsobí ako šéf katedry fyziky Stanfordskej univerzity a v súčasnosti sa popri svojej vášni pre kvantovú fyziku venuje aj otázkam globálneho oteplovania a je členom komisí vesmírnych letov americkej NASA. Douglas D. Osheroff, dobrý deň, vítajte. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Osheroff, I wanted to ask you, you said that researchers, they always ask a question every day, one question for nature. Did you ask many questions in your career?
Oh, I think, yes, but I don't think you just ask one question per day. It depends on how hard you work. So the idea is, of course, that every time you do an experiment, you're asking a question of nature.
When did you find the basic interest for science? Childhood?
I think it all started when I got an electric train for Christmas. And by the end of Christmas Day, I'd taken apart the locomotive to get the electric motor out.
Many parents, they believe that kids should avoid these kind of experiments. What is your opinion?
I'm glad that my parents weren't of that opinion, let's put it that way. I did a lot of things that were pretty dangerous, I think, when I was young. When I go to China, I always like to say, and so when I was 10 years old, I discovered gunpowder. Gunpowder. And the Chinese, of course, they invented gunpowder. They get it confused, so they will all sit there. No, we invented gunpowder. And I said, no, you guys invented gunpowder. I simply discovered that I could buy as much as I wanted at a local sporting goods store. And then when I got into high school, I guess I started taking more interesting classes. But by that time, I had so much stuff going on. I mean, I built a 100,000-volt X-ray machine in my basement.
Yourself?
Well, what I did is I went to several medical supply houses and asked if they had any leftover parts. And so, I came home with...
So you had been proactive, very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you built an X-ray machine, like a second-hand X-ray machine.
Yeah, I mean, I built it from old parts, so it wasn't like it. The hard part would have been to make the X-ray tube because it has to be evacuated very well.
How was it with the final decision of you becoming a scientist? How did it happen?
Well, so I did my undergraduate work at Caltech, which is already saying that I'm probably going into science.
Yes.
And, of course, at Caltech, I got involved in all sorts of things, in infrared star survey. So I would go up on the top of Mount Wilson and run this telescope. And we discovered all of the bright infrared sources in the sky. And then, I applied for graduate study to universities that had good astrophysics programs. Mm-hmm. But eventually, I thought about
what was the intention behind that?
Well,
I
found it very, I thought astrophysics was exciting, but then, I thought about who I was and everything like that, and what I really enjoyed doing, I always enjoyed doing experiments. And you can't change the temperature of a star and find out what happens to it.
At least not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, it'd be pretty hard. Yeah. So I switched, but I'd already applied to these 8 schools, and there was no one at Caltech in condensed matter physics, which I realized was probably the right field of study for me because you can do experiments, on almost a daily basis, and whereas if you're doing a lot of different kinds of physics, depends. You may have to, wait months in order to just get the apparatus to do the experiments. Yeah. So I think I was actually pretty insightful. and the most important thing is to understand what emotionally you want, right?
Yeah. And definitely to find an answer to the question, why am I doing this? What would I like to find out?
Well, I have to say, this all goes back to my high school chemistry teacher. His name was William Hawk. And he came in one day and he had a milk carton, and there was something inside the milk carton. And he said, research is like trying to find out what's inside the milk carton. You can do an experiment, and then every time you do an experiment, you're asking a question of nature. Nature has to answer your questions, but nature's answers are not what's inside the milk carton, but more like something about what's inside the milk carton. So he suggested, so if you rotate the milk carton about the horizontal axis, and what's inside rushes from corner to corner, you know it has to have cylindrical symmetry. and so we talked about different kinds of experiments you could do. But for me, that was an extremely important moment in my life, because he really was telling me how to do what I ultimately ended up doing for my whole life.
It's like a manual for how to do it. But did you get used to failed expectations? Because it's not always success at the end of the road. So, and you have to get mentally ready for that. It's failure, failure, maybe something, looks like something. So how are you prepared mentally for that?
Well, I think, as a kid already, I was doing things that didn't always work right, and so, but I think the more mature you get in science, you realize, of course, that experiments don't always work, and what you have to do is learn why they didn't work and what
find the reason behind that.
So it's this business that you're, as William Hawk said, every time you do an experiment, you're asking a question of nature, but sometimes nature doesn't answer. And so then you have to be more clever. You have to ask the right questions.
What if you feel the pressure? You've been working in many industries, and they paid you for doing this.
Yes.
And when you didn't come up with any results that would make a commercial profit or just bring money into the company, did you feel the pressure?
Well, actually, you don't understand. Bell Laboratories was a very different kind of place.
What kind of place?
So it was the telephone company, and it was a regulated monopoly. They had money that was guaranteed to come in, and so they were very happy to have people like. There were several different tiers of research going on, and some of it was very applied and very much related to the business of the telephone company. But at the bottom of this, they always wanted to have some researchers that were doing basic science, and partly because they were people then that the applied people could come to if they had questions. When I was a graduate student at Cornell University, I made this discovery, which ended up winning the Nobel Prize. So, that's the kind of expectations I had, so I'm going to work pretty hard. Not that I didn't have an expectation I would get a Nobel Prize.
Yes.
But the experiments would be that exciting.
Did you know at the very first moment that there is something exclusive, exceptional happening? Did you have this hint of being sure, like, yes, this is it?
Well, so I wasn't looking for superfluidity in helium-3. My thesis advisor wanted me to study solid helium-3. But it turns out that the refrigeration process that I was using to get to very low temperatures within a 1,000th of a degree of absolute zero forced me to actually be on the melting. The liquid helium-3 was ordering. That was the discovery that won the Nobel Prize.
And at the moment when you realize what is happening, what went through your mind?
Well, it's kind of interesting. So I had taken this kind of data for several nights, and then I started looking at it, and what I found was that I was doing nuclear magnetic resonance, or MRI as we call it now.
We know it.
In fact, it really was an early form of MRI, because I used a magnetic field gradient so I could get spatial differentiation. So I would see NMR signal coming from the liquid and NMR signal coming from the solid. And at this, I had already identified a couple of phase transitions. And at one of these phase transitions, the liquid NMR signal instantly dropped by a factor of 2. I wrote in my lab book, have discovered the BCS transition in liquid helium-3 tonight, and then I explained what the evidence was.
What was the first call you made?
It was in the middle of the night, so
It seems to me like everything interesting in your life happens in the night. Well, with the Nobel Prize, it's the same story, which we're going to tell later on.
It was the same time. It was 2:30 in the morning that I got the phone call from Stockholm. Yeah. I wonder if they did that on purpose. I don't know.
So at that night, at the night of discovery...
So at that night, what happened was I knew this was exciting, and so I ran around the basement of the physics building to find another graduate student to share this exciting news with. There was no one there. And in desperation, I went up to the 6th floor. That's where theorists hang out. Now, they would only be there if they fell asleep at their desk.
Yes.
But there was no one there. And so I think at 4 in the morning, I called up my thesis advisor. And you have to be sure that you're correct. You call him up at 4 in the morning. So he called me back at 6 a.m. He wanted more details. So he agreed that the evidence is very strong.
Which happened in 1970?
70, well, it was early 1972.
Okay, 72. And now we come with the story of the Nobel Prize, which happens in 1996.
Yes.
Why did it take so long?
Well, first of all, let me explain that superfluid helium-3 has absolutely no practical applications at all. So I think I can only speculate as to why they decided to give me a Nobel Prize at all, okay, as opposed to how long.
Did you ask them?
No, I didn't ask them. Okay. So, I mean, what happens, of course, is that, first of all, you have to be nominated to get a Nobel Prize. And only people that are invited to nominate or who already have Nobel Prizes can nominate. So it's a select group of people that can do the nominations. So I don't want to know, you
don't even know who nominated you?
No. Well, a lot of people would tell me over the years that they nominated me. This is very self-serving, of course, because then if you get the prize, then you sort of feel beholden to these people. And so after a while, I just completely ignored that. And when the night that I got the call from Stockholm, I wasn't even aware of the fact that they'd started giving out the Nobel Prizes.
I trust you. I mean, it was 25 years later, so and in the middle of the night, there is somebody calling you from Stockholm.
Hello? Yes. Am I speaking to Douglas Offeroff? Yes, it's 2:30 in the morning. I know it is, but I have a very urgent message for you. Yes. If you can take that. I am Carl Olof Jakobsson, the Secretary General of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. And I would like to congratulate you because the Academy just decided that you, together with David Lee and Robert Richardson, has been awarded the 1996 Nobel Prize in Physics. My goodness. For your discovery of superfluidity in helium-3. My goodness. Hello? I'm here. You're here? I'm here. Okay, and you are stunned, I guess.
And at that moment, my jaw dropped down to my navel because I knew exactly what this phone call was all about.
So in 96, you got a Nobel Prize. If you compare your life by people who are approaching you, by opportunities you're getting, before and after, what is the basic difference?
Well, I mean, I was a reasonably successful physicist, I have to say, and so I would go to a lot of international meetings and give talks and things like that. And afterward, everyone wanted, me to come to visit their institution and give talks and things like that. Well, maybe not everyone to begin with, but I ended up, I think I do a fairly good job of giving these kinds of talks that are stimulating for young people in particular. And I think it's a very important thing, too.
Why do you find it important?
Because otherwise we're not going to have the next crop of scientists. And if I look at my background, it was when I was very young that I developed the skills that allowed me to make a discovery that won a Nobel Prize.
And you're giving them advices how to do it.
No, well, not exactly.
So how would you define it? What is it?
So the idea is to get young people stimulated and interested in science, and so they learn how to ask nature these questions.
So you're giving them a manual.
It's kind of.
Recipe for them. I would like to quote you, which I'm not sure if I find at this moment, but I do remember what was the quote about. It was about, in case that I would get a Nobel Prize tonight and they would ask me, either I give a lecture or I go and take the prize, I would give a lecture. I would be with my students.
Yeah. I think you, as a professor, I think you, well, first of all, it's never really. It's not like if you give the lecture, you won't get the Nobel Prize. You just have to move the lecture around.
Why is it so important for you to be with students?
Well, they're I think, I'm
energizing?
a professor. Well, they are energizing. Their questions frequently are really, insightful, and it's kind of fun because you're basically training the next generation of scientists, and it's, they do come back and they will say what they're doing and thank me for having gotten them really interested in science, and
Do you think that we have a new generation of scientists? Is there something radically different if you compare yourself, your friends and colleagues in the late 70s, 80s, and the young generation you're teaching now? Do you feel a difference?
Well, if there is a difference, certainly a lot of these kids are very sophisticated now. Their computer skills vastly higher than mine.
Information is fast.
Everything's fast nowadays. But they're very well educated at Stanford, and they go out and they do good things. And so I think the one thing, if there is something that I had over them, is I really started at a very young age interested in science and doing experiments. A lot of them involved gunpowder or high voltage electricity and things like that. So I'm one of those people who's lucky that he survived his childhood, I suppose. But we all did that back in those days. There was a bunch of friends of mine, and we were rockets and bombs and all sorts of things. My youngest brother was investigated by the police several times.
I have one of your, let's call it advices, or part of the manual, and you advising those young people that curiosity should be the basic for the research. It should be driven by that. Always wonder, always doubt, try to find.
Yeah, I think people that feel that they have to do experiments in order to get money, or, those are not the right reasons. The reasons are really curiosity. That's what, what's happening here? Why does this material behave very differently than I think it ought to? And so, that is curiosity, and that's really what drives, I think. Look, you have to be internally motivated. If you're doing things because someone tells you to do it, it's not exciting.
It's just the way, from inside out, it should go.
You let your heart drive you. And what is it that your heart wants to do?
We talked about the frequency, and then the information goes fast. Are those students patient enough for nowadays research? Because we are so used to get the result quickly.
Yeah, it's true. Well, there are some experiments where the results come out pretty quick. A lot of what happens nowadays is people spend a lot of time building a piece of apparatus that will do something that allows them to make a measurement.
And you were telling me that with the helium-3, there was no practical use or practical result. How does it feel? Doing and working on something where you don't know exactly how in the hell are we going to use this?
Well, people had actually predicted, theorists had predicted that helium-3 would become a superfluid. And in fact, there were two different groups that had predicted specific ordered states of helium-3. And I actually discovered both of those states. So it was a verification that the theories were correct.
And you were first.
Yeah, yeah. but helium, I mean, the helium-3, superfluid helium-3 is very closely related to superconductivity, except that helium-3 atoms are neutral. They don't carry charge. But the kind of order is very similar to the kind of order you have in superconductivity.
In your wildest imagination,
I have a pretty wild imagination. Okay.
Do you see at least a slight chance of any use?
For superfluid helium-3?
Yes.
Well, people, I think there's someone at UC Berkeley across the bay, a guy named Richard Packard, was proposing that one could use superfluid helium-3 as essentially a gyroscope for use navigation by planes, for instance. And then he eventually realized, in fact, you could do that with superfluid helium-4, and superfluid helium-4 exists below 2 Kelvin, whereas superfluid helium-3 only exists below 2/1000th of a Kelvin. It's a lot easier to do it with helium-4, so that idea went by the boards. So it really has no basic, no real applications, but what we've learned about nature by studying superfluid helium-3s is pretty exciting, and it's been, your superconductors that people have discovered now. Of course, you know all about that.
Nowadays, if you don't spend so much time on research, do you miss something special?
Well, of course, I'm still at Stanford University, and I'm surrounded by people that are doing very good research, and I like to kibitz, so I'm involved.
Isn't there a small jealousy on what they're doing, how they spend their days and hours?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to say. I certainly, first of all, I'm an avid photographer, and I always bring expensive cameras with me, and I, love to photograph landscapes all over the world. And so the travel that I do is a lot of it allows me to. Someone will pay for me to go to some fancy place like the Iguazu Falls, and you don't know where that is. You know where the Iguazu?
Brazil?
Well, it's at the border of Brazil and Paraguay.
We are Europeans, we know.
I guess so.
We know. And whose choice was it to give up science, core science?
Well, I wouldn't say I've given up science. I've given up doing experimental science, but I still, fall. Actually, my wife is probably more knowledgeable broadly of science. She really reads a lot. I'm not a very good reader. I'm a slow reader, and physics is kind of not fast reading anyway.
Does she have an understanding for what you're doing?
Well, no, but she's a biochemist, so she.
Oh, so it's a very close discipline. I wonder what are the talks behind the kitchen table then.
So she, I think, understood that why I was coming home at 4 in the morning.
Which is very important.
I guess that's, yeah. I can imagine wives that say, "Where were you?" She knew where I was, though.
And she was invited as well for the ceremony, for the Nobel Prize ceremony.
Of course. Yeah.
Many people wonder what is the atmosphere at the ceremony. Tell us.
I have no idea what the atmosphere is. I mean, everyone, the Nobel laureates, of course, are happy to be there, and it's exciting, and and people are, they're interviewing you, not very different than what's going on now, I suppose, but you're on a high because how often do you get to win a Nobel Prize? They're actually sort of interesting. There are very few people that have won 2 Nobel Prizes, and a smaller number of people that have won 2 Nobel Prizes in the same field. So one of them is one of my great heroes, John Bardeen, who was got the first Nobel Prize for his work on developing the transistor. But then he created a theory that explained superconductivity, and that won a second Nobel Prize. So there was and then that all happened while I was still probably very young, but there was, just after I made the discovery, there was a big international low temperature conference. And I ended up sitting right across the table from this guy who was clearly my hero in science. And John Bardine's very quiet, though. So eventually I asked John Bardeen, I said, John, I said, Professor Bardeen, what do you think of this helium-3 business? And he thought very deeply, and he said, very interesting.
If you think of your research of helium-3, and in the future, here comes somebody who just finds the practical result. Would that make you happy?
You mean that helium-3 had some, what comes to mind is 你做梦, which is Chinese for you're dreaming. I mean, the trouble with helium-3 is it only exists so close to absolute zero that the cost associated with getting those low temperatures and getting them conveniently and reproducibly and everything like that be very high.
So it wouldn't be worth.
It's been, I think, a remarkable ground for physicists to understand what kinds of order nature allows and produces. But I think it doesn't have much practical value because of the very low temperatures that are required.
Thank you for this interview, and I'm glad that you took us one step closer of understanding of the nature. Thank you, I appreciate it a lot.
Okay, well thank you. You were very good at this, but I knew that to begin with.
Thank you. Našim dnešným hosťom v relácii Portrét bol fyzik pán Ošerov.